Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another session with Ask Dr. Saleem. A very welcome to everyone. In this session, we take your questions, whether they are in Urdu or English, and then Dr. Saleem answers them in English so that we can reach a wider array of audience. You can send your questions in the chat, or you may raise your hand to ask your question. They'll be asked in the order that they're received. And so our first question today comes from Rafia Khwaja. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shazad. Can you hear me?
Walaikum assalam. Yes, loud and clear.
Dr. Shazad, my question is that infertility is a major problem all around the world. In certain Muslim countries, if the wife can't conceive, the husband brings a second wife. Now, science has developed a lot, and infertility treatments are available to women all over the world, but our ulama keeps passing fatwas against it. I want your views on treatments like IVF, PGDs, surrogacy, adoption. I heard a village man recently give fatwa that surrogacy is for the woman to enjoy extramarital sex. As you know, these treatments are strictly for infertility, and you can give a fatwa against everything. Can you please give me your views on this? Because the women suffer, and the man can just bring another wife, even though the problem may be with him. So, particularly surrogacy is a very controversial, and even adoption, I've heard fatwas against it that there should not be adoption. The child can't be your child.
Okay, so you've raised a few questions. Let me try to address each of them. As far as infertility treatments are concerned, whether they are IVF or other means, they are perfectly okay. I mean, this is just like a treatment for a medical condition, and every medical condition which is treatable is an advancement that we owe to science and also our gratitude to it. And the thing that needs to be understood here is that as far as these fertility treatments are concerned, the fertilization must strictly be between the sperm of the husband and the egg of the wife. There cannot be any third insertion in this regard, because you see the marriage is between the husband and the wife. So the sperm and the egg, or the ova, as it is called, has to belong to the wife. Whether it is fertilized outside of them and then placed in the embryo, or the womb of the mother, or any other treatment is adopted. So as far as surrogacy is concerned, surrogacy has to be treated analogous to, I would say, fostering, or just as you foster a child, you suckle the child, but the child belongs to a separate pair of husband and wife. But the surrogate mother is, the person who suckles her, or the woman who suckles her, is a third person. So very analogous to that, I would say that surrogacy can also be viewed thus, such that the fertilized egg can now be placed in the womb of the surrogate mother, and she would be just responsible of nourishing already fertilized egg, which is called a zygote. So the zygote is something which is now already formed because of the fertilization between the husband and the wife. So all that the surrogate mother is doing is that she is providing that haven, that sanctuary, that place of nourishment. And as a result, I would say, just as foster mothers, they have special rights, and they become your mehram and you cannot marry them. In a very similar way, surrogate mothers will have this right, that they'll have the same rights as your mother. And just as you cannot marry your surrogate mother, your mother who suckles you, similarly, that should be adopted. And as far as adoption itself is concerned, I think it's a very noble gesture. I mean, you can adopt children at any age. If you adopt them at a younger age, such that you are suckling a child, or you are in a position to suckle the child, that would be best, because in that case, the child would be your foster child, and it's like almost having your own child. But if that is not the case, then adopting a child in which he or she starts living with you is absolutely fine. And I think it's a very noble deed, a noble gesture. But a word of caution here has to be, announced, and that is that one needs to understand that adoption at the time is something of a very emotional size, I would say, because you tend to take a decision at times in this state of emotions. But at times it does happen that when the child grows up, the adopted child grows up, and he or she doesn't turn out to be, let's say, a good individual or a person who would you, I mean, like really like, for example, he or she ends up with some bad habits, or he or she is not that, not well placed, as you can see, because of the habits that he or she might have, then the parents get, why did we, adopt such a child? So I think caution has to be exercised. I mean, when you adopt a child, he can or she can turn out to be any individual, and as such, you just cannot disown that individual as that individual grows. So you must keep these pros and cons in mind. But the deed itself, I mean, adoption in itself, I would say, is a very commendable deed. It's like taking care of someone who others could not take care of. Many a time this happens, but yes, also occurs within families in which it is known that if there's a couple who's childless, then some other couples within the family, they give their child to the couples who would like to adopt it. And the third thing which is important in adoption is that if the child, when you adopt it, is young at age, whenever he or she grows up, then his or her lineage should be, unfolded to her. He or she cannot be put in the dark. So their real mother or father must be communicated to them. And if it is not known, of course, then this information should also be communicated to them, that your mother and father were not known and we have adopted you. And fourthly, another thing is a cause of confusion. I'd like to clear that also, and that is you can even give your adopted child your own surname. That is no problem. I mean, as long as the child, when he or she grows up, knows who he or she belongs to actually, or who are their real mother and father, then you can even give your child your own name. So, I mean, if all things are exercised, I would still say that it's a very, very, noble gesture you can do. And this is something which is often happens in societies which are strife-ridden, which are war-ridden, and people do so. They do so in a very magnanimous way in our Western societies, but somehow our Muslim societies, they are close to this concept of adoption, and I think there's no need to be in a situation that you have those reservations. If you know that adoption itself is a very noble deed, and it can, it's something that it's not easy to do. Yes, but then if you are able to do it, then I would say I would actually take my hats off to such people.
Shehzad Sahab, the surrogacy is only used when the woman's womb cannot carry the child. So I understand. As far as adoption is concerned, I've heard actually religious leaders, some religious ulama say that the child cannot call you as parents. You can't use your surname. So the problem becomes his education, travel, passport. And they said, no, you can call your uncle, aunt. And the one thing Ghamidi Saab, I heard him emphasized, as you said correctly, that as soon as the child grows up, he must know that he's adopted. And as long as you do that, then I think, you're giving an orphan a home, a beautiful home. I think Allah wants us to do this.
Right.
So thank you very much for explaining it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a longer question, Dr. Saleem, so I'll try to read it out. So this one is referring to Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 4712 and number 6. They say that we understand that the final review of the Quran took place during the month of the last Ramadan that the Prophet witnessed before he passed away. And the Quran was complete in its final shape at the time. And then from Sahih al-Bukhari, we also learn that the ayah, Al-Yawma Akmaltu Lakum Dinakum, that's part of Surah Ma'idah, ayah 3, was revealed when the Prophet delivered his last sermon, standing at Al-Arafat during Hajj al-Wada'. But the month of Ramadan comes before the month of Dhul Hajj. So if the Quran was complete in its perfect shape during the month of Ramadan, then how come we see a new ayah, which is from Surah Ma'idah, being revealed after almost 3 months in the month of Dhul Hijjah?
So I think that in this regard, the narrative of Bukhari, which says that this was revealed on the occasion of the last Hajj, that needs to be reviewed because in my personal opinion, yes, the Quran was complete at the time of Ramadan, which is well before Dhul Hijjah, as the questioner has pointed out. And it was, of course, at that time, the Quran was rearranged. We know that it was given a new arrangement, and that arrangement was absolutely different from its historical sequence, from its chronological sequence. And in the last Ramadan, we also know that this happened in twice. So it is said that once Gabriel recited the whole of the Quran before the Prophet, and once the Prophet did so before Gabriel. And also we know from the history and hadith that in the last Ramadan, the Prophet sat for 20 days in itikaf. Usually he would do so for 10 days. So keeping in view on all these details, and keeping in view the fact that the Arzaya Akhira, or the last final review, was done, I would say that as far as the narrative which says that verse Al-Yawma Lakum Dinakum of Surah Ma'idah was revealed in Surah in the time of the last sermon, that needs to be reviewed. And I think that more details need to come up. It should be critically evaluated. And if there is no flaw in the narrative, then it is suffice to say that it is against the Quran itself. So even the narrative seems to have no flaw in its chain of narration. And if it goes against the dictates of the Quran, then it cannot be accepted.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, what is meant by Nur of God, and is God made of Nur?
What exactly? Could not take this part. What did you say? What is
what is meant by Nur of God? Allah's Nur.
Matba, what did you could you spell out what you said?
The Nur of God, like the
Oh,
light.
what is okay? What is meant by Nur of God? Okay.
Yes, and is God made out of light?
Okay, so this is a common misconception that has arisen because of a certain verse of Surah Nur, which says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, masalu nurihi kamathalatin fiha misbah. This is a longer verse of Surah Nur, and literally translated, it means God is the light of the heavens and the earth. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. And from this verse, people think that, well, this verse is actually telling us the substance from which God is made of, because apparently it says God is the light of the heavens and the earth. So if you read the verse in completion, I mean, as you go down, you'll find that the verse is actually talking about belief in God, because the opposite sentence which occurs after this first part of Surah Nur, it says, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. So basically, those who have disbelieved, they are mentioned right after this verse. And the correct translation in comparison to this opposite sentence would be that belief in God. So Iman Billah, Allahu Nur Samawat wal Ard would mean that Iman Billah, or faith in God, is something which lights up the heavens and the earth. In other words, it means that these heavens and the earth, this world, is a dark place if you don't have belief in God. It's something which is inexplicable. It's something which is, you just cannot think that it has a purpose, because if there is no God, or if you don't have any faith in God, then this world seems to be a meaningless place. So basically, this is a topic which is mentioned at several instances in the Quran, that it is the existence of God in this continuum which tells us that this universe has a purpose, because it has been created for a purpose. So it's this erroneous translation of this verse which has given rise to this conception that God is made of light. Whatever God is made of, we don't know. I mean, this is something the Quran has not disclosed at any place. What we know about the person of God is that nothing about his person. What we know about him is, we know him through his attributes and through his practices. As far as his being is concerned, as far as the composition of his physical self is concerned, there is nothing that we are told in the Quran. So this verse, Allahu Nur Samawati wal Ard, even if it is taken in a different meaning, it would say that God is the light of the heavens and the earth. It never says God is light. So for that, the word should have been Allahu Nur. I mean, the word should have stopped here, but it doesn't stop here. So even if the verse is not taken the way I have tried to explain it, and it is taken in the conventional meaning, it would still mean that God is the light of the heavens and the earth. In other words, whatever lights up the heavens and the earth, that is God. So even that translation does not mean that God is light. So I've tried to explain both these translations, although in my own understanding, as I said, here it's not being said that God is the light of the heavens and the earth. What is being said is that belief in God is the light of the heavens and the earth, which means that believing in God lights up the heavens and the earth as far as their reality is concerned, as far as their meaningfulness is concerned. Because if we read this verse in opposition to the next verse, this becomes absolutely clear. And if there is any confusion still left, I would refer you to the exegesis of Ustaz Islahi, pick it up, and he has explained this pretty well.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Saleem. I'd like to remind all our participants that you may ask any question that you have in either English or Urdu, your language of preference. And if you'd like to request Dr. Saleem to answer you in Urdu, he can also do that. And if you'd like to remain anonymous, you can also send your question in the chat. So Shabnam, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm a little unclear about the concept of intellect and heart in the Quran and in the worldly sense. In the worldly sense, we think that intellect is the center of wisdom and logic, and heart is the center of emotions, and it's better to take decisions using your intellect. But the Quran says something else. So I would like to know something about it. Thank you, sir.
So the fact that heart is something which relates to our emotions is more of our psychological finding. As far as the Quran is concerned, it does not use the word heart in this sense. It uses the word heart that it is the center of our personality or the soul. So we have two existences, so to speak. We have a physical existence and we have a spiritual existence. So the spiritual existence is the existence of the soul. So center of that spiritual existence, the Quran calls the heart. To the heart that it says that your heart will be called to question, it will be called to account. Inna sam'a wal basara wal fu'ada kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'ula, which means that your hearing and your sight and your heart will be called to account on the day of judgment. So basically, your soul, which is responsible for your awareness of good and evil, your inner personality, whatever your inner personality is composed of, the Quran uses the heart as the center of inner personality. And as far as your own intellect is concerned, it uses it as a faculty in which you understand things, you reason things, you argue about things. So the intellectual faculty or the faculty of intellect is more related to our mind, and it is something which the Quran addresses. It does not address our emotions, it addresses our mind. And the word taqilun or tafakkarun, these are words which say that you should reflect, or you should use your insight, you use your intellect. So these are faculties through which you understand the Quranic wisdom or the purport of the Quran. So these are two distinct things. So as far as the heart is concerned, it is the center of our inner personality. And intellect is, as far as intellect is concerned, it is a faculty that we have through which we use our intellect to understand and evaluate external data.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Habiba Zafar, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, मेरा सवाल है कि sometimes when we are working on ourselves और हम अपने temperament के ऊपर काम कर रहे होते हैं, हमें पता चलता है कि हमारे अंदर बहुत सारी बुराइयां हैं. तो हम जब अपने आप को करेक्ट करने के लिए थोड़ा सा स्पेस मांग रहे होते हैं और हम अपने ऊपर काम करना चाह रहे होते हैं, तो हमें हमारे पेरेंट्स और हमारे जो एल्डर्स होते हैं वो उस स्पेस के कॉन्सेप्ट को, सॉलिट्यूड को नहीं समझ पा रहे होते हैं, एंड दे आर लाइक ओके, मतलब अकेले नहीं बैठना कि बच्चा डिप्रेस्ड ना हो और आइसोलेट ना हो जाए, तो वो आइसोलेशन को और लोनलीनेस को कंफ्यूज कर लेते हैं सॉलिट्यूड के साथ। तो उसको किस तरह कम्युनिकेट किया जाए, बिकॉज पेरेंट्स को लगता है उनका राइट है कि आप हर वक्त उनके पास बैठें और उनको क्वालिटी टाइम दें, लेकिन समटाइम्स इट्स इम्पॉर्टेंट कि आप कभी कभार अपने आप को अपने ही ऊपर कॉन्टेम्पलेट कर रहे होते हैं कि अच्छा मुझसे ये हुआ, अब मैंने इसको इस तरह सॉर्ट आउट करना है। तो इसके बारे में आप क्या कहेंगे कि हम उन्हें किस तरह ये एड्रेस कर सकते हैं कि हम लोनली नहीं हो रहे, हम उनके किसी राइट को वो वायलेट नहीं कर रहे, वी आर जस्ट वर्किंग ऑन आवरसेल्व्स, बिकॉज इस तरह कम्युनिकेट करना उनसे थोड़ा सा मुश्किल हो जाता है।
Well, I think, as you have said, the right thing is to communicate what the truth is. I mean, every likes privacy, every person likes to meditate, every person likes some time to his own self. So what you need to do is simply communicate this desire, this need which everyone has, and think that there is any problem in telling them, because at times an argument might ensue. So you can always write a beautiful, loving message, starting off telling them that you really care for them, and that, of course, as parents, you would always hold them in high regard and esteem, and give them all their, I mean, whatever priorities they have set in life. But at the same time, then you can make your own point that, well, as a person, at times, I also need some privacy, and it's like my me time, in which I would like to reflect on a lot of things. So when I do so, please don't think that I'm neglecting you or that I am ignoring you. It's just my own personality which needs that privacy. So I think it's just a matter of communicating your intention towards your parents. And if you think that you'll not be able to do it verbally, I just maybe writing a message to them, or if even that is something that you might think is difficult, then another thing is that you can involve a third party, maybe an elder brother, maybe a relative, or your aunt or your uncle. At times they can they are helpful in communicating your concern. So my advice is that basically your concern should be communicated to your parents, whether you do it directly, whether you do it through a written message, or whether you do it through a third party interference. Because that is how that is how they'll realize that they are not understanding you, and they are probably thinking that you are neglecting them, you're not giving them time, whereas I think it's not the case, as you have said. And still another thing that you can do, maybe if all these three things are possible, is that maybe you can use up that time for contemplation when your parents are not around, maybe, or like, for example, when you're going to bed at night, or when they're outside of your home. So if you can use the time in which they are not there and they're not, I mean, observing you, so that so these are some
Sir,
of the things that you can do.
I wanted to ask कि क्या ये जिस तरह होता है, क्योंकि ये थोड़ा सा वक्त बदल गया है, एंड उन्हें बताना कि इट्स अ नीड एंड इट इज समथिंग आई नीड, एंड वी ऑल नीड सम पर्सनल स्पेस जहां हम ग्रो कर सकें, एंड अ टाइम फॉर सेल्फ लव एंड contemplating on ourself, on our temperament, ये एक नीड है, एक राइट है एक ह्यूमन बीइंग का। अगर आप बिल्कुल रिस्पेक्टफुली और बिल्कुल उस तरह करें तो उसको नीड और राइट कहना सही होगा, बिकॉज देन वो उसको कहते हैं कि अच्छा हमारे हकूक हैं, एंड यू नो ऑल दैट स्टफ। तो अगर मैं इसको डिक्लेयर करूं कि ये हमारी नीड है एंड हमारा राइट है कि हमें थोड़ी सी पर्सनल स्पेस दी जाए कि जहां हम अपने ऊपर काम कर सकें, तो इसको ऐसे कहना ठीक होगा?
I
बिकॉज
think it's
दे
perfectly,
ऑल्सो,
I mean, it's okay. I mean, the only thing is how they would perceive it. So as far as the statement itself is concerned, it is absolutely true that yes, it's the right of every individual to have his or her own space. But you see, at times parents don't understand this. As you've said, the times have changed. So whatever term you use it in a way that they are able to understand your actual need. So at times when you make a case for the fact that something is your right, they might not understand if they are, I mean, slightly old-fashioned in their approach. But parents who realize what rights are, then there's not a difficulty for them in understanding it. So it depends how they will perceive a particular sentence or a particular word. So choose your words very carefully. And the best thing is that I mean, you know your parents well. So choose your words in accordance with what they would understand best. And if you think that all these alternatives are difficult, as I said, choose a time in which your own private time is one in which they are not at home, or maybe when you're in your room alone or something like that. But as I said, these are all options available to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. So this question asks Dr. Saleem, क्या कुरान को तजवीद के साथ पढ़ना जरूरी है या तो फिर आप आम उर्दू में पढ़ सकते हैं? And complementary to that, there's another question that asks, is it acceptable to read Quran from digital applications or screens? And is there any difference in spiritual rewards if you're reading it, say, through traditional recitation, as in, I'm assuming, a book?
So, I mean, whether you read it from a mushaf, which is a book, or whether you read it in its digital form from your phone or from your tablet or from your computer, there is no difference. I mean, or even if you don't use any of these aids and there is something in your memory, you've memorized part of the Quran and you're reciting out of memory. So all these are various tools through which you are reading the Quran, and all of them are equal. But the important thing is that whether you read from your mind or from your tablet or from your book or from anything, please do try to understand the verses, and whatever they say, you must try to also read its translation in any language that you understand. So merely reading the Quran in the Arabic without understanding is not going to do you any good. It's not going to be of any benefit to you, because the Quran is a book for guidance. And unless you are able to understand the guidance, how can you act upon that guidance?
So the question also goes into whether it's important to have tajweed, or could you read it in sort of the way you would pronounce it in Urdu? So you don't emphasize the same way you do in Arabic.
So tajweed actually means that you try to read the Quran in the dialect and in the accent of classical Arabic, or the accent in which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. So you see the Prophet and his tribe, which are called the Quraysh, they had a very typical accent. So that is how when we learn tajweed, we learn the rules of pronouncing the Quran in the accent of the Prophet and his companions. It's not something mandatory at all. I mean, of course, it is good that you can do it because it does sound very, very melodious to the ears, and is also very moving. So when we hear the recitation of the Quran, we all know how impactful it is. But this is not mandatory at all. If you can do it, it's very good. If you cannot do it, then just pronounce the words the way you can.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, क्या नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने अगलुतात से मना किया गया था?
किससे मना किया गया था?
अगलुतात. And they say अगलुतात से मुराद वो मसाइल हैं जो वाक़िअ होने से पहले फर्जी तौर पर कायम किए जाते हैं.
Okay, उगलुतात. Okay, yes, उगलुतात. These are hypothetical questions in which you are just supposing a situation to happen. I don't think I have ever come across a narrative of the Prophet which says that he has stopped so, but if the questioner has some narrative in mind, I would like to know about it. But other than that, it is something which itself is true, that why should you ask questions which are based on suppositions and hypotheses? And also let me point this out, that in our seminaries, in our madrasas, this is a very common practice in which they give you a sort of a question. Aghluta is something which is an ambiguous situation, and you have to make sense of it. So at times, for the purpose of practice, they give you, mind-boggling questions, which are, you just need to wrestle in your mind, and they are basically meant for training. So personally, I do think that some of these questions which are meant for your training might do you good. But other than that, if you start using them for other purposes, I would not suggest that this is a good practice. Yes, when teachers, they are trying to impart certain things to their students, some of these ghulutas, they are effective in sharpening our wits and sharpening our senses. But other than that, I would say that employing them for other usages is not correct, or at least it's not beneficial.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
So my question is about the multiple recitation. Some say 10, 7, some say 10. And the ayah in Quran Pak, on Surah Qiyamah, when Allah says, Inna alayna jam'ahu Qur'ana, wa iza Qur'anahu fattabi Qur'ana. इसी बारे में शायद आपने या गांधी साहब ने फरमाया था कि this is the last, this means this was the last recitation done to Jibreel Islam to Muhammad Sallallahu and back to them, and we should recite the Quran in this in this last recitation that was done. And like you just said that we should try to read Quran in the dialect of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So is that what my understanding is good?
These are two different things. These are entirely two different things. As far as the Surah Qiyamah verse is concerned, basically, the interpretation that you're talking about was done by Ustaz Hamiduddin Farai. So, so what he has said is that the Arza Akhira, or the last review or the last presentation, was the one in which the Quran was to be recited out in a new sequence. So in that particular verse, the word qiraat is not used for tajweed. It is being used for the new arrangement of the Quran, the new sequence of the Quran. Whereas the questioner who has just asked, just before you, was asking about the way you pronounce a particular verse. So tajweed is how you pronounce a verse or a set of verses. Whereas the Arza Akhira, or the last presentation, related to the sequence in which you would arrange the Quran. Remember, the Quran was arranged or was revealed in one sequence, and then it was rearranged. So Surah Qiyamah verses are talking about this rearrangement. They're not talking about tajweed.
I have another question, Mariam, can I ask, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Also about ahadith, we had a big discussion again this morning about ahadith and some, especially the ahadith that contradict Quran. And so my contention was, no, we will not accept any hadith that's contradict Quran, especially. And then my argument was, I was trying to support my argument with this ayah in Surah Haqqa, from 40 to 46, where Allah says, Hablu Breed wale jo hai. So is that my understanding correct, or we were having a big argument this morning?
This verse does not have any bearing to this discussion. Other than that, you have.
But Allah says that, but my understanding is, and correct me please, that Allah says that my Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would not say a word more or less what I am saying in Quran. So from there, I take it. I take my understanding that Quran, Allah did not say anything contradictory to Quran. So, but any of these that contradicts Quran is not my Rasul saying.
Yes, I understand your question. But as I said, this verse in Surah Haqqa is وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْدَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ. It is actually referring to the fact that had the Prophet concocted the Quran by himself, the Almighty says that he would have really grabbed him and he would have punished him. So this relates to the fact that the disbelievers were actually saying that the Prophet himself has made up the Quran. It's not from God, it's from the Prophet himself. So the Almighty actually addressing indirectly those disbelievers was telling them that, look here, if the Quran had been concocted by the Prophet, he would not have survived. He would not have lived one more instant because of this bad thing or this evil doing. Whereas the issue of hadith is entirely different. You see, hadith literature, which is, of course, something which the Prophet spoke of, they were basically his conversations. So they were something which people asked questions, or maybe at times he passed a comment. These were all conversations which were reported by individuals. And of course, that report, the way they were reported, could not have granted them any immunity because they could have made errors in reporting them. So that is an entirely different debate, that anything which is outside of the Quran, if it contradicts the Quran, it cannot be accepted. However, this verse does not relate to this whole discussion. This verse only tells us that if the Quran itself had been made up by the Prophet, then he would have really received God's, punishment. So that verse has a different implication.
I still think that you are saying the same thing, maybe a better word than mine, that Rasulullah did not say anything contradictory to Quran. Is that
You
not
see,
correct?
that's another thing. To say something which is contradictory to the Quran is a separate matter. And to make up the Quran is another thing. So see, this verse is actually answering the objection of the disbelievers. You see, the disbelievers said that this Quran is not from God. The Prophet is making it up himself. He is fabricating it. He is concocting it. And in reply, the Almighty says that no, he's not concocting it. And had he been guilty of this concoction, then I would have grabbed him. لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ. So these are very strong words.
Very strong.
And this is what I was saying. So this is basically against that objection, which said that the Prophet is making it up himself. It's not from God. So that is a separate issue.
How would you defend those ahadith that people keep insisting and saying that Muhammad Sallallahu said that and he had the power to legislate, and so how would you defend that?
I mean, because we know from the Quran when it says it is the Mizan and the Furqan, it says Allahu allazi anzala al-kitaba bil haqqi wal mizan. So a Mizan is a book which says that everything will be weighed in the scales of this book, and anything against it will not be accepted. So verses which talk about the Quran being the Mizan and the Furqan, they tell us that the Quran is the final authority. And because the Quran is the final authority, anything which contradicts this authority will not be acceptable. So if you have to adduce any verses in favor of the fact that the Quran is the final authority, then these verses are the ones which tell us, and there are a couple of them in the Quran, that the Quran is the Furqan and the Quran is the Mizan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Maria.
Muhammad Qasim, you're up next. Please go ahead. Muhammad Qasim.
Assalamu alaikum.
Right.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, sir. From many a times I've been struggling with the question. और बहुत बार कोशिश भी कि इसको हल कर ले, लेकिन हल नहीं हो पा रहा, और इसकी वजह से कभी कभी मुझे प्रॉब्लम भी होती है. वो ये है कि नमाज में जो हम लोग मतलब जो एक पाबंदी है कि आपको सूरह फातिहा अरबी में पढ़ना है, उसके बाद एक दो आयत या एक सूरा अरबी में पढ़ना है, तो ये पाबंदी का रीज़न समझ में नहीं आता है. उसके बाद फिर इस्लाम की जो बुनियाद है वो फितरत है, तो ये समझ में नहीं आता कि फितरत भी मतलब इसका कोई मीनिंग नहीं बनता है ना, कि कोई चीज़ हमको समझ में नहीं आ रही है, बस हम उसको मतलब कुछ ऐसा लगता है जैसे कुछ मुंह से साउंड्स निकाल ले रहे हैं, और मतलब इट मेक्स नो सेंस. उसके बाद फिर मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम से पहले जितने भी कौमें थीं, तो उनके ऊपर जो नबी आए थे और उनको जो नमाज पढ़ना था, इबादत करना था, वो सब अपनी अपनी ज़बानों में करते थे. तो अब हम अपनी ज़बानों में क्यों नहीं कर सकते? अब एक बात आ जाती है कि भाई जब हम जमात में नमाज पढ़ रहे हैं सब, तो सबकी अलग अलग भाषा है, तो उसमें अगर हम लोग अलग अलग पढ़ेंगे तो बहुत मुश्किलें पैदा होगी. लेकिन अगर हम अकेले पढ़ रहे हैं तो फिर हम सूरह फातिहा अपनी ज़बान में क्यों नहीं पढ़ सकते? उसके बाद कोई आयत अपनी ज़बान, तो ये सुन्नत किस तरह से हुई समझ में नहीं आता है.
Okay, thank you. This is a very important question. I think we have answered.
उर्दू में
Okay.
प्लीज आंसर कर दिया.
तो ये आपका जो सवाल है, ये इससे पहले भी बहुत दफ़ा यहाँ पूछा गया. मैंने अर्ज किया था कि देखिए इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा गलतफहमियाँ पाई जाती हैं. इसमें जो दुरुस्त नुक्ता नज़र है वो ये है कि नमाज जो है वो अल्लाह ताला ने आप यूँ समझ लें कि दो ज़बानों से इबारत बनाई है. एक तो ये है कि कुछ जगह अल्लाह ताला ने मुतय्यन कर दी हैं कि जिनको आपने अरबी में कहना है, क्योंकि वो अल्फाज ऐसे हैं कि जिनका जो एक अरबी का इम्पैक्ट है, या आप समझ लें उसका जो असर है वो गैर मामूली है. लेकिन एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा नमाज का वो है कि जो अल्लाह ताला ने आपकी अपनी ज़बान पे छोड़ दिया है. तो आप यूँ समझ लें कि नमाज जो है उसके कुछ हिस्से ही हैं जो अरबी में पढ़ने हैं. बाकी इसके अलावा मैं आपको भी बता देता हूँ कि बहुत सारे ऐसे हिस्से हैं कि जो आप अपनी उर्दू में, जो आपकी भाषा है, जो आपकी ज़बान है, उसमें आप पढ़ सकते हैं. फ़ारसी में हो, हिंदी में हो, संस्कृत में हो, कोई भी ज़बान आप इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. तो 5 जगह हैं नमाज में जो कि अरबी में पढ़नी ज़रूरी है. एक अल्लाहु अकबर का जो लफ्ज़ है, दूसरा सूरह फातिहा आपने कहा, तीसरा अगर कुरान की जो चंद आपने सूरतें आयत पढ़नी है सूरह फातिहा के बाद, चौथा समी अल्लाहु लिमन हमिदा, और पांचवा जब आप नमाज खत्म करते हैं अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाह. اس کے علاوہ نماز میں، رکوع میں، سجدے میں، جب آپ اتحیات میں بیٹھتے ہیں، نماز جب آپ شروع کرتے ہیں دو سجدوں کے درمیان، ان سب میں آپ کوئی بھی زبان استعمال کر سکتے ہیں. چاہے آپ عربی استعمال کیجئے، چاہے آپ اپنی بھاشا استعمال کیجئے، چاہے اس میں آپ دعا، مناجات، اللہ کا شکر، اللہ کی تسبیح، ان تینوں چیزوں میں سے کچھ بھی آپ اختیار کریں، اس میں زبان کی پابندی نہیں ہے. تو اس طرح سے پھر یہ ہوتا ہے کہ زبان کچھ الہی کلمات کا اور کچھ ذاتی کلمات کا مجموعہ بن جاتی ہے. کچھ چیزیں جو آپ خود اپنے دل سے کہہ سکتے ہیں، اس کا موقع ہے. تو دیکھیے جو اتحیات کا ٹائم ہے، یہ سارے کا سارا وہ ٹائم ہے کہ جو اصل میں دعا کا ٹائم ہے. اس میں جو آپ درود پڑھتے ہیں، اس میں جو آپ اتحیات کے الفاظ شروع سے کرتے ہیں اور پھر آخر میں آپ دعا پڑھتے ہیں، یہ بنیادی طور پہ سب دعائیں ہی ہیں. تو چاہے آپ یہی اڈاپٹ کر لیں، اور چاہے آپ ان سے بالکل ہٹ کے اپنی بھاشا میں، اپنی زبان میں کوئی بھی الفاظ دعا کے استعمال کر سکتے ہیں. اس سے آپ اندازہ لگائیے کہ نماز کے اندر ایسا نہیں ہے کہ آپ کو یہ پابندی ہے کہ آپ کو پوری نماز ہی عربی میں پڑھنی ہے. عربی میں پڑھنے کے صرف وہ 4 یا 5 مواقع ہیں. اس میں بھی وجہ وہی ہے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ چاہتے ہیں کہ آپ کو قرآن مجید سے انس پیدا ہو. آپ کو صرف یہ تو نہیں نہ کرنا کہ اپنے اندر ترجمے سے اپنے آپ کو اللہ تعالیٰ سے متعلق کرنا ہے. خداوند تعالیٰ ہی چاہتے ہیں کہ آپ کے اندر یہ خواہش پیدا ہو، یہ ڈیزائر پیدا ہو کہ آپ اتنی عربی سیکھ لیں، اتنی قرآنی عربی سیکھ لیں کہ جب عربی پڑھی جائے تو آپ سمجھ سکیں. تو یہ تو بات یہی ہے کہ جب آپ نے عربی جب تک نہیں سیکھی ہوئی تو یہ ایک مشکل ہے. لیکن اصل میں تو ہمیں ٹارگٹ یہ رکھنا ہے کہ یہ ہم اس میں پیچھے کیوں رہ جائیں. دنیا میں ہم بہت سارے کام کرتے ہیں، بہت ساری چیزوں میں ایفرٹ کرتے ہیں. تو میں یہ اکثر کہتا ہوں کہ ایک بہت بڑا کام جو ہم سب کو کرنا چاہیے، کوئی بھی ہماری عمر ہو، وہ یہ ہے کہ تھوڑی سی محنت سے ہم اتنی عربی سیکھ لیں کہ ہم قرآن مجید کو جب وہ پڑھا جائے عربی میں وہ پڑھ سکیں، سمجھ سکیں. سو آپ چاہے ذاتی طور پہ وہ پڑھ رہے ہوں انفرادی زبان میں، نماز میں، یا جب آپ جماعت کی نماز میں مسجد میں جاتے ہیں تو امام پڑھ رہے ہوں تو آپ کو وہ سمجھ آئے. دیکھیے یہ ہے اصل ٹارگٹ. تو اگر اصل ٹارگٹ پہ آپ کی نگاہ ہوگی تو آپ کو لگے گا کہ بھئی یہ تو بہت اتنا کم ہے کہ مجھے صرف سورہ فاتحہ اور سورت ہی کو عربی میں پڑھنا ہے. آپ کا دل چاہے گا کہ میں عربی وہ سیکھوں تاکہ مجھے وہ سمجھ میں آئے. تو سارا زور آپ اس پہ لگائیں کہ ایک طرف نماز ان 2 چیزوں کا مجموعہ ہے. آپ ذاتی طور پہ بہت ساری نماز کے اندر میں نے بتا دیا وہ جگہیں ہیں جہاں آپ اپنی زبان میں آپ اللہ سے بات کر سکتے ہیں، اور وہ کچھ جگہیں ہیں جو عربی میں. لیکن اس کے ساتھ ساتھ یہ کوشش کیجئے کہ اپنے اندر بھی، اپنے اولاد کے اندر، اپنے آس پاس کے لوگ، یہ تھوڑی سی محنت کی چیز ہے. 5 6 8 مہینے ایسے بہت ساری ویب سائٹس بن چکی ہیں، بہت سارے ایپس آ گئے ہیں جو فون کے ذریعے سے آپ کو قرآن عربک تھوڑی سی محنت سے سکھا دیتے ہیں. تو میں اس کو اکثر بیان کرتا ہوں کہ قرآن عربک جو ہے وہ سیکھنا، اس کو اپنی زندگی کا جو ایک حصہ بنائیے، ایک مقصد بنائیے. یہ بالکل کوئی مشکل کام نہیں ہے، تھوڑی سی محنت سے آپ سیکھ سکتے ہیں.
جی جزاک اللہ خیر.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. This next question asks, animals can be trained using a reward and punishment system, and similarly, God has made eternal reward and punishment systems for us humans. But he's also said that we also have free will, and hence we are put in this test. So what's so special about human beings that even animals can be trained using the same reward and punishment system? Do we really have a choice in this world? And once you're done with this, there's a sort of related second part to this
Okay.
question.
So, I mean, as far as human beings are concerned, basically it's a test of their free will. Because you see, what the Almighty wants us is to make the right choices in life. So for those right choices, you have, I mean, your own conscience, your own inner nature. It espouses for you the fact that yes, what is good should be adopted. So basically, it's the voice of your inner self that you are trying to accept and follow. And as far as reward and punishment are concerned, they are the consequence of following right and wrong. So human beings, if they are punished for something, it's not, I mean, as a punishment that we generally assume it's in that form. Basically, it's a punishment for forsaking righteousness, for forsaking the cause of our own conscience. So our own conscience, our own inner self, it drives us towards good. But because of vested interest, because of base desires, because of, I mean, it could be jealousy, it could be a lot of things come into play. You are, at times, you're not up to doing what good is. So the Almighty wants us to follow that inner voice that all of us have. And if you don't follow that, so the punishment is basically something which is, I mean, in continuous or in consonance with the fact that what you're doing so is something that your own nature is going against. And when your nature is going against something, then, I mean, you are trying to go back on that nature which God has created you. So that is why this whole system is like in harmony with us. So reward and punishment are the consequence of following the voice that we find in our own selves. So it is not the fact that we have to overcome or we have to go against our nature to do good, and then we will reward it. So you see, the path is so smooth that our own conscience, it gives us this signal that yes, righteousness is the path that you have to tread. And if you have a deep connection with God, if you know your own priorities, to do what is good and to do what is right will be very easy for you. But if you have other interests, if you have other priorities in life, then doing good becomes very difficult. So you see, basically what God wants us is to follow our own nature, to follow our own inner voice. And it has also said that this is very easy as long as we are connected to the real purpose of life and to the fact that there is a God who is going to bring about a day of judgment, and for which we shall be rewarded. So that system is like a backup. It's like a supplement to what we have inside of us.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. So the second part is related to your answer, and it asks, for Muslims who do good due to their character, not due to love of Allah and Prophet, will they go to Jannah?
I fail to understand this because you see, when you're doing good, you are doing good because you're following your own nature. And your nature is something which has been created by God himself. So how can you go against God? I mean, that love for God or love for the Prophet, it is something which is already ingrained in you, and when you do good, you don't realize that you're doing so because you love God and the Prophet. So as far as righteousness is concerned, it is the reflection of God in our own inner being, in our own inner self. So if we do act on that righteousness, what we're doing is that at times we don't connect that we are doing this because of our love of God, because we are so used to it. But if you start analyzing it through our intellect, I mean, start breaking it down into smaller sentences and ask yourself that, why are you doing this? You say, well, I'm doing this because it makes me feel good, and it's the call of my conscience. And what is your conscience? Well, it's that inner system, that inner mechanism which corrects me. And where has it come from? Well, it has come from God, because when he created me, he made me distinct from animals. And one of the distinctions which I have from animals is that I have this inner voice which I follow, and it has been placed in me by God himself. And when I follow that inner voice, I follow God. So you see, it's all a question of breaking up the whole argument into smaller pieces, and you realize that when you're doing good, you're basically doing it because of that mechanism that is found in you, which has been placed in your own self by God himself.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Now we have two Riyaz. I'm calling on Riyaz that doesn't have Khan at the end of their name. So just Riyaz, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Dr. Saab, my question is, that in the same ayah of the word, sadr and qalb has been used. Does it mean different? It must have the different meanings. But
which verse are you? Which verse are you referring to?
I am referring to the An-Nahl, the 106. It says, "Man kafara billahi min ba'di imanihi illa man ukriha qalbuhu mutma'innun bil imani walakin man sharaha bil kufri sadran."
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and there is another verse also in the Az-Zamar, which also uses the same, the sadr and the qalb in the same thing. So from there, I understand it must have the different meaning. But a lot of scholars, they say, use it interchangeably, that it means, the heart or the other thing. Does it mean one means the iman or the other means the intellect or something like that?
No, actually, it's just a question of translating the verse correctly. So this verse, "Illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutma'innum bil iman." That is they are the Arabic words. So if you translate them, so it says that except if you are compelled, whereas your heart, "Illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutma'innum bil iman," and their heart is content on faith. Qalbuhu mutma'innum bil iman. So basically, it is referring to that same thing, which is your inner personality. So when you profess faith, you have faith. It's not your body which is professing faith, it's your soul. So all these metaphorical So these metaphysical realities like faith in God, faith in the hereafter. Who professes faith in that hereafter? I mean, my physical body is nothing. It's just a organic mass of cells. So when I say I believe in God, who am I? I'm talking about my real personality, my soul. So the word qalb again is used here as the center of your soul. وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ would mean that their heart is content on faith. Their inner personality is content on faith. They are people who profess faith.
So the other sadra means, I mean, that they are not.
Sadr is just just a metaphorical expression, which means that they what is in their heart, what is in their chest is satisfied. So sadr is actually once again something which is used for the heart itself, something which is as you can see in Surah Adiyat, it said, أَفَلَا يَعْلَمُ إِذَا بُعْثِرَ مَا فِي الْقُبُورِ وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. So حُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ would be whatever is found in their hearts is then taken out. Of course, meaning that their own feelings and what they thought about, their mental imagination or the ideas. So this word sadr is used again as a zarf, I would say, or a locus in which the heart is contained, because our heart is inside our chest.
So these two words mean, is it the location then the sadr is used for?
It depends. I mean, if you read out the verse, I can comment. Can you read out the word which says the word sadr or uses the word sadr?
Yeah, I can use وَكِمْ مَنْ شَرَحَ بِالْكُفْرِ صَدْرًا فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ.
Right. So this is something which is exactly in the meaning of the heart. Sadr is now representing your heart, because your heart is in your chest.
So both words in the qalbuhu, first one also means the heart.
Yeah, right.
And the sadr also means heart in this
exactly. Ayah. Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bismillah Tirmizi Ahmed, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. My
Right,
question to you is, there's a movie being released on the 27th of October in the US and I think worldwide, I'm not sure. It's called After Death. It talks about the experiences that people have, when they're on the operating table, or if they've been through some kind of, physical emergency and they die and then they experience something and then they come back. They've been able to brought back to life. How do we explain this in the light of the Quran? And is there any, how can I understand this? How do I make sense of this?
I think it's very easy to make sense of this. You see, what happens is that at times, clinically, you are dead. I mean, your heart stops, and then it is revived. You must have read it in medical journals. There are many documentaries on this. There are other documented data in which the heart stops, and then through various procedures like CPR and some other injections and some medicines, they are able to revive your heart. So now, clinically, once the heart stops, the body is dead, and probably the body is not functioning, but the soul has not left your body, so to speak. So once the heart gets revived, the soul is still there. So there was this period in which something had happened, in which you were clinically and medically dead, but your soul was still in the body. So I think that is how, when you come to life and you recall, maybe, it was about this particular period of time of couple of minutes in which your body was not functioning, it was medically dead, but the soul was still there, so to speak, and it was yet to leave the body. And once the body was revived, the soul had this memory in it regarding those couple of minutes in which the body was not functioning. And maybe it is a narration of that 2 or 3 minutes, which the movie is going to talk about. I'm trying to make sense of what it might be. So this is something which is not, found in just a movie. You would see that there are so many after-death experiences which people narrate, even in our own families. They say that, well, this is what happened. And when we look at their cases, yes, we find out that their heart had stopped at a particular instant and there was a flat line, there was no heartbeat. And then that revival took place. So I think that I do make sense of it, that this was that lapse of few minutes in which something had happened, and it was recalled by the memory once life, I mean, once the body started to function again.
But then, they talk about either, from what I've seen movies of this nature before. It almost seems like people talk about heaven and hell, that we talk about in the Quran, that, almost similar. They've seen old
Right.
relatives. It seems like a peaceful. Is it possible that people go to a
I don't
place
think
like
so.
this and then come back?
No, I don't think so. You see, I mean, from the Quran, we know that once a person dies, the soul is, just taken away and it is buried, or so to speak, in a hanut, is a word that we use in some ahadith, which tell us that just as your body is put in a casket or in a box and buried, in a very similar way, these souls, they are put in a place in a box or something like that, and until the day of judgment, they're just put to sleep. I think that what they are narrating are maybe psychological or effects that they have in their minds, because we don't know what's going on at that time. That is something which still a conjecture. So what I'm trying to say is that medically and Quranically, it's something which is possible. The experiences themselves, they have to be broken down and evaluated separately, because you don't know what that person was thinking or what exactly. Maybe he's hallucinating. Maybe there's some ideas that were circulating in his subconscious, and that subconscious, the way we dream at night, that subconscious comes to the surface and it becomes your conscious self. So maybe there was some data in his subconscious and that came over to his conscious self. So these are, questions which relate to parapsychology and to psychology, and they should tackle them. But as far as this issue is concerned, that how is it religiously possible, I say yes, it is possible, because of the fact that hearts get revived, and as a result, that afterlife experience or after death experience, I would say, is something that is plausible.
So we basically look at that little part of their soul leaving the body for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, more like a dream state, because it could also just be the neurons in the brain having
these are questions that I cannot answer. See,
okay.
These are questions that I cannot answer. This needs a parapsychologist.
So we just let it be.
Belong to this.
We don't.
What I can say is that, it doesn't go against any precept of the Quran. It doesn't contradict any Quranic verse, I would say.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We still have 4 questions and we are very close to our ending time. So if you give us the permission, if we could go a bit over time, maybe 10-15 minutes, and ask people to give us concise questions. Otherwise, we can end the session and continue in the next IC session.
Yes, I think we can continue for 5 more minutes because I have an appointment.
Okay. Riaz Khan, please go ahead. Please make sure your question is very concise.
Assalamu alaikum, Doc. I have 2 questions. What was the form of Prophet ﷺ's teachings? In other words, we don't find a whole lot of details on how did he bring people, or how did he present Islam to people to invite. The only one place which I find is that when he met the people from Medina, and that was one of the instances where he said several things. So that's one question. And the other one is related to that, is how did they pray in Mecca? In other words, the prayer, namaz, how was it conducted in Mecca? In other words, in ritual-wise. Thank you.
So as far as the Prophet conveying religion is concerned, you'll find details in the Quran itself. You don't need to go into history. Yes, there are historical accounts in which we know that the Prophet went to the Kaaba, he would recite the Quran there. He would go to the gatherings of the Quraysh, he would recite the Quran before them. At times, they would pose questions, and the Quran and the Prophet would come back to them and say that, well, now I have received this revelation, and this is how I would answer, or this is how God is answering the question that you have raised. Similarly, we know initially from the Quran that in the first couple of years, he confined his teachings to his own family, as the Quran says in Surah At-Tahrim, and he would go to them and he would say that I have been receiving this Quran, this divine book from God, and this is what it tells me. And his family at times would take him to task, or they would not listen to him, and they would make fun of him. We also know that some of them accepted faith. And then we know from the Quran, Surah Muzammil, that after some time the Prophet was told that, well, now your first phase in which you were just confined to your own family has now ended, and now you must embark upon communicating the book of God on a larger scale, and go to them and tell them and knock at their doors and inform them that a heavy punishment awaits them if they don't accept the messenger of God. So he would do so. And we also know that there was a reaction as a result from the Quraysh, and there are so many surahs like Surah Ankabut which tell us that this reaction, the Prophet was, he was punished at times. So we also know that when he went to Taif, and some of his companions that also went along with him, they were also bruised and beaten. And we also have other expressions in the Quran which tell us that the more his message spread, the more was the reaction. So the Meccan surahs portray this, although not in very explicit terms, but there are very strong insinuations which tell us that the Prophet went to them, and he, as a result, received a very, very harsh reaction. We are talking about the Meccan period. And then when he went to Medina, of course, he became the ruler of Medina. And then in Medina, the situation changed, because just before going to Medina, we know that the leaders of the Aus and the Khazraj tribe, Sa'ad bin Muaz and Sa'ad bin Ubadah, they had accepted faith. And as a result, Medina had become very conducive to his preaching. And then it was much more easier for him, because now the debate had been, which was initially confined to the idolaters, now it had extended to the people of the book. So the people of the book, they were found in Medina, in the whereabouts of Medina, in the city itself, and they were the ones who were actually waiting for the last prophet. And many of them accepted faith. In Surah Al Imran, they are praised. As they say that, well, these are the people who, when they hear the Quran, not only Surah Al Imran, you'll find in Surah Maida that about them it is said that they would start crying. Their eyes would well up with tears when they would hear the Quran and they would accept faith. So you see, all these details are found within the Quran, if you just read it in a more, I would say, reflective way. And besides the Quran, you'll find our history books and our hadith books also giving us a lot of information on how historically the Prophet had this maltreatment. He suffered wounds at times, and his own companions, we know Bilal, anhu, how he was treated in a very ghastly way. We know Ammar bin Yasir, he was tied to four limbs. His 4 limbs were tied to 4 camels, and they were then made to run in opposite directions. So these details can be found in hadith literature as well. So if you study the Quran in tandem with hadith literature, you'll find a lot of details in how this mission of the Prophet went about, and how he reached various sections of his own society, both in the Meccan period and in the Medinan period. What was your second part?
How were the prayers conducted in Mecca?
Yes, so in Mecca, we know initially the prayers was conducted individually, and then, at times when the Prophet would try to pray in the Kaaba, he would be, they would see and they would not let him pray. We know from Surah Alaq that once when he was doing so, they tried to stop him. Also, they tried to do bad things to him, but. And as far as the question is concerned, that as long as they remain in Mecca, we don't have any record of congregational prayers. I think because of the fact that there was a hegemony of the Quraysh on the Kaaba. But once the Prophet shifted to Medina, we know the mosque was made there, the Masjid Nabawi, and they had regular prayers being conducted there, because the environment was much more peaceful as against the war-stricken and war-ridden environment of Mecca.
Just one part to this. After Isra and Miraj, there was still some time that Prophet had migrated. So even at that time, they did not pray. In other words, there was some time before he migrated from Mecca to Medina. Isra and Miraj occurred about a year before his migration. So
Isra and Miraj, yes, they occurred before that. But you see, 5 prayers were always there. People were praying individually throughout the Meccan period. So the question that I was addressing was that whether they were praying individually or in the Kaaba. So, as I said, there were attempts by the Prophet to pray in the Kaaba, but he was stopped from praying there. So I do assume that whenever he would have got the chance, he might have gone there. But there were no declared congregational prayers because simply the Quraysh would not allow them. However, in Medina, I mean, this was not the case. I mean, they were freely offering congregational prayers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have just one more raised hand if there's enough time remaining.
Okay, please go ahead.
Muhammad Jamil, please make your question very concise. Go ahead. Muhammad Jamil?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
मैं जरा उर्दू में क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहूँगा आपसे
जी।
अच्छा सर, मैं पूछना ये था कि समटाइम्स अगर हम ट्रेडिशनल जो व्यूअर हैं या जिनका ट्रेडिशनल व्यू है कुरान की ट्रांसलेशन में, जो क्लासिकल आती जा रही है काफ़ी अरसे से ही, यानी शुरू से ही, उनका और जब हम फराही स्कूल ऑफ थॉट का मुआवजना करते हैं समटाइम्स, तो कुछ जो है वो इस तरह से है कि कुछ आयात जो हैं उनकी ट्रांसलेशन जो है वो बड़ी फिट होती है फराही स्कूल ऑफ थॉट की, और कुछ जो है वो क्लासिकल स्कूल ऑफ थॉट की बहुत मसलन के अच्छी फिट बैठती है कॉन्टेक्स्ट में। और समटाइम्स इस तरह से होता है कि दोनों कोई भी अगर ट्रांसलेशन जो है वो उस तरह से माइंड को सेटिस्फाई नहीं कर पाती है, तो अगर समटाइम्स मैं या मेरा ये आइडिया होता है कि यार ये इस तरह से नहीं खुदा कह सकता है, या ये ट्रांसलेशन जो है ये मुझे सही बैठ नहीं रही है, फिट नहीं बैठ रही है।
आपका सवाल क्या है?
तो मैं नहीं ये समझता हूँ कि जो खुदा की वर्डिंग ऐसी होगी। तो इस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से मैंने पूछना ये था कि अगर मैं ये बात ट्रेडिशनल किसी बंदे से करता हूँ तो वो मुझे तर्जमे की बुनियाद पर कहते हैं कि यार आपने कुरान का इनकार कर दिया है, तो मैं कुरान का इनकार तो नहीं कर रहा होता उस तरह से, मैं तो जो ट्रांसलेशन है उसका मुद्दा जो है वो मैं बयान कर रहा होता हूँ। जैसे सूरत तलाक की आयत नंबर 4 है। अब हम जब क्लासिकल व्यू या ट्रेडिशनल व्यू पढ़ते हैं तो वहां पर वो वहां से जो है चाइल्ड मैरिज का व्यू लेते हैं, वो ड्राइव करते हैं वहां पर, लेकिन मेरा ये मानना है कि वो चाइल्ड मैरिज को वो नहीं करती है प्रमोट, वो बिल्कुल किसी तरह से भी नहीं। और जो उसका मीनिंग अभी लेते हैं, जैसे अभी जिनको हैज नहीं आया जैसे, तो वो अभी का मतलब तो वो आफ्टर मुकारबत ही होगा ना, इससे तो बच्चा तो बिल्कुल मुराद नहीं है, यानी उसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट पढ़ ले। अगर औरतों की बात हो रही है
समझ गया हूं,
तो औरत में बच्चा किसी तरह नहीं।
जी, आपकी बात में समझ गया हूँ। देखिए, बात वही है कि आप ज़ाहिर है कुरान का तो इनकार नहीं कर रहे होते, तो तर्जुमे ही इस पे आप इजहार कर रहे होते हैं कि आपको समझ में नहीं आया। इस वजह से ये बात तो सही नहीं है कि कोई आपको ये पे इल्जाम लगाया कि आप कुरान का इनकार कर रहे हैं। बस अपनी जुस्तजू को जारी रखें, क्योंकि हमारा काम होता है एक बात की तह तक पहुँचने के लिए कोशिश करना। उस कोशिश करने में आप क्लासिकी जो तफसीरें हैं उनका मुताला करें, आप फराई फ़िक्र की जो अप्रोच के हवाले से जो तफसीरें लिखी हैं उनका भी मुताला करें, और आप देखें कि किस के पर आपका दिल ठुकता है दलाइल की बुनियाद पे। तो दलाइल हैं जो फैसला करते हैं। अगर किसी की भी दलील आपको कमजोर, किसी की भी मजबूत नहीं लगती, तो तलाश जारी रखिए, जुस्तजू जारी रखिए। आप कहिए कि अभी मैं मुतमईन नहीं हुआ, मैं अभी और देखना चाहता हूँ, तो इल्म की तो कोई निहायत नहीं है। तो जुस्तजू को कभी ख़त्म ना कीजिए जब तक आप मुतमईन ना हो। और बहुत सारी चीज़ें होती हैं जहाँ पे तवक्कुफ करना पड़ता है, जिसको कहते हैं कि कभी हम समझ नहीं पा रहे हैं, लेकिन हम समझ जाएंगे। तो कोशिश का जो एक प्रोसेस है उसको जारी रखें।
जी बिल्कुल, यानी एक जैसे फराही स्कूल ऑफ थॉट में सूरह फील की जैसे इंटरप्रिटेशन है, उसमें वो मसलन कि बिल्कुल मुझे ये लगता है कि वो बिल्कुल आउट ऑफ कंटेक्स्ट है, क्योंकि वो अरसल वो है ना, वो अरसल
इस वक्त तो हम मिसालों में तो नहीं, मैं गुजारिश कर रहा हूँ ना कि मिसालों में जाने के बजाय उसूल में बात को रखिए कि अगर आपको कोई तावील दुरुस्त नहीं लगती तो आप इस पर मुतमिन हैं, तो आपको इसका मुकल्लफ नहीं आप उसको एक्सेप्ट करें।
मैं आपके असूल की बात कर रहा हूँ। आपने उसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन में ये कहा था कि ये जो क्लासिकल व्यू है या ट्रेडिशनल व्यू है, उसमें मौलाना मदूदी साहब भी हैं, उनका भी ये तर्जमा निकलता है, इधर से दोनों मीनिंग्स निकलते हैं। तो फिर इसका मतलब है वो दोनों मीनिंग्स जब उसमें से निकलते हैं तो वो कोई भी अडॉप्ट कर लें, इससे मसलन के नहीं फर्क पड़ता है हमें कोई भी।
नहीं, मैंने तो ऐसा नहीं कहा। अगर आप दोबारा सुने, मैं तो इसमें मैंने बहुत तफसील से बताया कि इसमें फराई साहब ने जिस तरह से प्रेजेंट किया है वो ही असल तावील है। मदूदी साहब को तो मैंने सिर्फ ये बताया था कि उन्होंने एतराज़ किया है और उसका जवाब भी दिया गया है। ये तो नहीं कहा था कि उनकी तावील निकलती है। अगर आप दोबारा सुने इस वक्त ज़ाहिर है कि मौका नहीं है, वरना मैं आपको तफसील इसकी बताता। असल बात देखिए, अपनी असल बात पे वापस आ जाइए, और वो ये है कि किसी तावील پھر آپ کا اگر دل نہیں ٹھکتا تو آپ اس کے مکلف نہیں ہیں. آپ اپنی تلاش جاری رکھیے, اپنی تحقیق جاری رکھیے, اور بس اصل چیز یہ ہے, باقی چیزیں ضمنی ہیں.
یعنی میرے پہ کفر نہیں واجب آ جاتا اس طرح سے؟
نہیں بالکل نہیں, ایسا بالکل نہیں ہوتا, بالکل بھی نہیں.
یہ مولوی تو ڈراندے رہتے ہیں سانو, جو نہیں جی آپ نے انکار کر
نہیں,
دیا آیت کا, یہ
آپ
ہو گیا
اپنی
وہ.
جستجو ہاں نہیں, آپ جستجو جاری رکھیے, اور جو حق کی تلاش ہے ہم سب اس کے مکلف اور مسافر ہیں. سو ہم نے سچائی کی تلاش میں نکل کھڑے ہوئے ہیں,
جی
اور
بالکل.
جب تک ہم زندگی ہے, سانس آ رہی ہے, ہم یہی کرتے رہیں گے.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem, for answering all those questions and staying extra time with
جی
us.
بالکل,
And
بے
thank
شک بے
you
شک.
to everyone for joining us for this session. We're out of time, so for all the remaining raised hands and chat questions, please keep them for the next Islam Study Circle or Ask Dr. Saleem session. And inshallah, see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. Assalamu alaikum.
Inshallah.